Morning, everyone. We'll begin here at about 9 o'clock, so you have a few minutes to grab a cup of coffee, and we'll be right back shortly. Good morning, everyone. We'll wait about another minute or two till everyone files in, and then we'll get started shortly.
Morning, everybody. I just want to thank everybody for hopping on. We're going to be starting here in a second to go over Pro Control and Z-Wave. I actually have Matt Sundberg here that's actually going to do the webinar from RTI/Pro Control. I want to thank Matt for hopping on as well. And we do have a lot to cover here and, try and keep it as close to 20 minutes as possible. So if you guys have any questions, please put them in the questions box, and we'll take as much time as needed after the webinar to answer all your guys' questions. Again, I want to thank you guys for hopping on, and we're going to get started here with Matt in 1 second.
Thanks, Chris. Morning, everyone. We'll get started here since we do have 20 minutes and your time is extremely valuable. A little bit about me. My name is Matt Sundberg. I've been with Pro Control for about going on 7 years now. Kind of been, I started in tech support, worked my way up to product specialist. Now I do a little bit both on the Pro Control side as well as the RTI side of the boat. Today we're going to focus on Pro Control as a whole, kind of the differences between the two remotes that we have, the R and the Z. And we'll look into a little bit of the programming, see how fast and efficient it does program, and then we'll take a look at the very end, kind of the Z-Wave, how Z-Wave is added into Pro Control Studio as a software, and how to build out a system from there. To get started, we're going to first talk about the hardware technologies that we have inside of Pro Control. Not only do we have just remotes and processors, we pride ourselves on the full customization that we have inside of our user interface for our customers, because that's what separates us from everyone else. Not only do we just have pre-programmed templates that you can stick to and build from and kind of navigate and build from scratch, but you can also take those templates that are fully programmed and modify them however you see fit. Coming with that, the full customization, we also have IR for control. We have 433 between the remote and processor. We use 2.4 gigahertz Zigbee for our Z line of remotes for communication. And one of the things that you'll note with our remote and processor pairs is that these are true processors. So when we send a single command from the remote to the processor then acts independently of the remote itself. So we're not worrying about just a massive string of RF commands going to a processor, the processor converting them from RF to IR, then spitting them out. We only send a single trigger command to the processor, and then the processor will begin its series of commands that live within the processor itself. This allows us great flexibility with sending commands from the processor or sending commands from the remote or doing it simultaneously. This also offers great reliability because we're only sending a single command to the processor instead of a series of RF commands, which we're then converting into IR. So very, very powerful. When we first launched, this just was not seen remotely at this price point, and we kind of borrowed a lot of things from RTI, and we frankly brought them down to a much more reasonable price point, a little bit easier to get into, and the software, of course, as you'll see, is quite easier to navigate as well. Some of the software advantages, so not only do we offer customization on the hardware, but we also offer software advantages that may not be possible in other forms, especially when it comes to graphics on that user interface. Your own buttons, images, text, backgrounds, colors. You can, again, stick with our templates or completely wipe that screen, whether the screen is on the remote, on the iPad, iPhone, and build it completely from scratch if you're so inclined, or just stick with our templates that are pre-programmed right off the bat. All of our products are dealer protected. We're only sold through distribution, and all of the login for our website, of course, is protected as well. The product lineup is quite simple. On the left-hand side, we have the ProLink processors. We have an R and a Z. We have a few accessories in the middle, whether it's an iPad or a candy bar remote or an iPhone or emitters or connecting blocks. There's a whole bunch of accessories that kind of float around there. And then the far right-hand side, we have our two Pro Control remotes, our Pro 24R on the left and the Pro 24Z on the right. We can break these down into two different series of remotes. We have the R series on the left and the Z series on the right. Starting on the R series, you can use the remote just line of sight, so you don't have to pair it with a processor to gain that RF capability, but you certainly may. Think of the R series as IR control. Whether you're sending IR commands from the remote itself, or you're sending RF commands from the remote to the processor, and then the processor is sending IR out. But at the end of the day, on the R series, you're controlling your devices, your TVs, your receivers, lighting control, whatever it may be, you're controlling it with infrared. That's the major difference here, infrared on the R series. Now you can do, again, RF from the remote to the processor, and then send IR out from the processor. You can do any combination of sending IR from the remote, from the processor. Even on the R series, we can tie a ProPanel app, our iOS app, to the processor, but just bear in mind, we're just talking to the processor over IP, and then the processor is sending IR. No IP control on the R series, no RS-232 control on the R series, only IR. On the Z series, on the right, we offer the same look and feel. In fact, the remote looks basically the same, although we do add a 5-way joystick on the face of the remote. But we now have the ability to control IP devices, whether that's receivers, HVAC, your Nest thermostat, Sonos. It's all of this opens up a whole next level of programming. So not only can we get feedback on the remote of what's actually playing on our Sonos or what source we're actually selected on our receiver, but we can also perform logic based upon that. So if the receiver turns on, dim the lights in the theater room. At a certain time of day, turn my lights on outside. So there's a lot of different logic that we can perform. So it's not just it's not just IP and RS-232, but we also get a whole bunch of other information that we can pull and test and create different scenarios on based upon that. The 24R, 2.4-inch color touchscreen. The battery is built into the remote. It is a user replaceable battery, lithium ion. Both the remotes have the same exact battery, so if you're ever worried about you need to swap it or you need to buy a new battery, there's only one, so you don't got to worry about that. You can do IR learning directly into the remote, so if for some weird reason we don't have an IR code in our database, although it is pretty good, you can certainly learn them in as well. You can use that remote standalone, or you can pair that with the ProLink R processor. This will give you your RF control, so stuff this back in a rack somewhere. Distance is about 90 feet. Of course, if you put more stuff in between you and the processor and the remote, that's going to drastically cut that down. Just keep that in mind. It's more based towards a single room solution. That's what the ProLink R is biased towards. You can control it with an iPhone, iPad. Just remember, the iPhone or iPad will not send IR out locally. Everything has to be routed through the processor, so that means you're putting emitters on all of your devices. In the Z series, we step up to the same screen. We have basically the same look and feel. In fact, when you first program these, make sure you have the right remote, the 24R and the 24Z. Sometimes, obviously, one program won't live on the other, but just keep that in mind. It is quite easy to get them confused, especially the first time you're go ahead and programming. The step-up part is the 2.4 gigahertz Zigbee. This will give you that two-way communication, whereas 433 is just one-way RF. 2.4 gigahertz Zigbee is bidirectional, so that's giving you that information back on the remote. And of course, you can want to pair that with the ProLink Z processor, which gives you the same about the same range, but it also offers expandability. So if you wish to get more range between the remote and processor, we do have a add-on piece called the Pro RFZ, which is basically a wireless repeater for the remote and processor to get that extra distance you need. And of course, it does support the iPhone, iPad device connecting to it, and it does provide two-way feedback as well. So it's bringing you that information on the screen as well as on the remote if you choose to do so. You don't need to have a remote with a processor. You can just pair a processor with the app. Either processor, there's no need to have a physical remote if you don't desire to have one. The app itself, there is a license fee that resides on the processor. So when you connect the processor, you fire it up, put the license on there, and then the iPad will connect to it. Of course, has to be paired with a processor. We're not going to talk directly to a remote control. Keep that in mind. And the license is tied to the processor, not the iOS device. So if you ever need to swap out an iOS device or the user gets a new one, all they simply have to do is power cycle the processor. It will release the license, and then you can simply follow the on-screen display on the Pro Panel app for the new device. So pretty easy to walk through someone on the phone. You don't have to roll a van for that one. Of course, today we're going to talk about is the Pro.ZWE, the Z-Wave interface. Of course, there's multiple Z-Wave interfaces that we've always worked with, Leviton or Vera, and this is kind of our own spin. I'll show you how quick and easy it is to bring that into. And finally, the glue that ties everything together, Pro Control Studio. This is our programming software suite. Has everything you need, whether it's IR codes, drivers, firmware. When you have the latest version of Pro Control Studio, you have everything you could possibly need to program your system file. There's nothing else that you need software-wise. It's all in one nice, neat bundle. Very easy to customize. We'll show you the auto programming, how quickly it works, get into Z-Wave, and show you a little bit how to work with the buttons and the images that you see in front of you. One thing I do like to note, as some of you may know, RTI and Pro Control, we kind of grade the lines between the two products sometimes. We grade those lines even further. If some of you are familiar with the RTI side of the boat, which is our parent company, sister company. Oops, timing's a little off there. We now offer the ability to expand. So if you do have a Pro 24Z or a ProLink Z, this can be programmed inside of RTI Integration Designer Apex. So it gives your clients room to grow in case you're concerned about other things coming down the line as they expand. Very end here, benefits of Pro Control. 3-year direct replacement warranty. Batteries are 1 year. That's fairly new. Dealers are only through a local distributor. We don't offer any online sales. We don't sell retail. It's only through distribution, and we don't plan on changing that at all. So programming software is not available to end users. Don't give it out. Don't put it on your client's computer, and if you must, please delete it when you're done for the day. All right, let's take a look at the actual programming software and see just how easy this really is. Here's Pro Control Studio. If you don't have a login so far to get the software, please go to procontrol.com, register in the top right-hand corner. We verify through Capital that you are who you say you are, and then we'll authorize your account, and that will gain you access to the software training videos. You'll be able to hear my voice rattle on for many, many, many hours on all the videos I've placed up on there. But that'll get you a good starting point in addition to what you're seeing today. First thing you'll do in Pro Control Studio is add your remote. We're going to add a Pro24Z because we wish to use the Pro.ZWE today to add some Z-Wave devices. You can name this whatever you want. It's mainly for your reference. I'm going to go ahead and add a ProLink Z processor. Again, especially if you have multiple processors in a residence where you're maybe doing an upstairs system and a downstairs system, very beneficial to name them according to where the actual processor lives, because you will accidentally download one to the other and one to the other, then everything will be all screwed up. So it is beneficial to actually name your remote and processor. On the far right side of your screen, you're going to see some properties and values. This depends on what you have selected on the left. There's some physical properties that are fairly self-explanatory for the remote, and then for the processor, you'll see this as well. One of the things I like to point out on the processor is the system zone code. This is a unique code for every remote and processor pair. This will allow every system to be separated from others. So if you are in an installation where you have multiple processors, or you're in a condo type situation where there could be a possibility the next door neighbor has a Pro Control system, throw a unique code in there, number whichever you wish from 0 to 255, and that will guarantee that there is no system conflicts between you and someone else who decide to leave that system code's zone code as the default 0. So just a heads up there. If I want to add some control devices, let's say I want to add a driver, a two-way driver. This may be a little bit different from the nomenclature that you're used to. Infrared device, pretty straightforward. An RS-232 device is one-way. That's what we consider a one-way command. So it's RS-232, but only one-way, no two-way communications. Anything that's two-way we consider a driver, whether it's IP or RS-232, and a lot of our drivers do both back and forth. In this example, I'll just grab the Yamaha driver. It comes with a whole bunch of pages kind of pre-populated for me. You can kind of see a preview of what that would look like. I'll grab one page just for the sake of adding it and press OK. Once I've added that driver, far side of our screen, property and value column, we can change the properties. If you want to do static entry for the IP address, if you want to do serial port off of the processor, you can do that as well. That's where all the individual settings for the driver exists. If you have any questions about that, or the driver is not connecting, if you hit the info button right above, this will kind of give you all the ins and outs, and if there's any gotchas about the driver or any settings on the device you wish to control, this is where these additional information will reside. I'll go through and add a few more devices here. I'm going to add an infrared device. When you search our database, keep your searches very, very broad. Most of our IR codes are combined into one. If it's not explicitly listed, just go ahead and grab most models. It's going to ask to create a page for you as usual, and you can rename a device. I'll just leave it as Blu-ray. I'll press OK. I'm going to add a few more drivers here. I'll grab the weather driver, because drivers are free, so you may as well add them. Type in your zip code, your location. I'm going to add one more device here. Let's add a Sharp TV. Group 2. I'll add a TV page, press OK. And let's actually take a look at the programming. So if I double click the remote or select the remote and hit edit, either way it's going to open up my edit screen. And this is everything that's been pre-programmed for me right off the bat. On the left hand side we have the physical look and feel of the remote itself. On the center of the screen, we have a view of what the remote screen will look like. And on the far right, we have a property, macro, and images tab. When I select that Blu-ray button, you'll see all the physical properties, how that button looks, feels, and operates. You can change multiple settings in here. Excuse me. If you go to the macro tab, that's where all your commands exist. If you need to make any changes in here, you can simply delete a command or add, and this will give you your entire list of commands that are available at your disposal, whether it's page links, whereas the individual IR commands you need to add, you can drag and drop, you can double click to add them on the right, however you wish, and then you can just move these around however you want to operate that. Of course, you can always remove commands if you've screwed up, or you can just modify them whatever you see fit. One thing I will mention is that the drivers are a little more complicated. You'll see there's a lot more inputs and functionality available than just straight IR codes. And just keep in mind that when you do add main power or whichever command you wish to add, there's usually a subset of commands within that driver down in the bottom in the property and values column, and this will give you your power on, power off, toggle. Just because there is a large plethora of commands, we didn't want to have just a massive list. So we kind of nested it a little bit and added those additional commands within that function. So keep that in the back of your mind when it comes to drivers. Other than that, the page is kind of pre-made for you right off the bat. There's some placeholders. You can go ahead and delete those. They won't actually download to the remote, so you can just leave them be if you wish. If you go to the weather page, you'll see everything's pre-populated with text and variables. You should be able to do nothing. It should work right off the bat. And same thing goes for all the other pages that are pre-populated for the device itself. So this is just kind of a brief overview, quick, easy programming. You can see all the information that's built from you right from scratch when it comes to templates and ready to go right off the bat. When you're all said and done, just go ahead and click Save, and if you hit Download at the top of your screen, select your remote, download to your remote, download to your processor, and away you go. Kind of running really short on time, 20 minutes isn't a whole lot, but I also like to talk about Z-Wave. I'll go ahead and build a Z-Wave. And to add a pro.zway, that's our little module that we sell in conjunction with the Z and the R. Double-click the processor, much like you would double-clicking the remote to open up the editor. We'll add it as an expansion device. Here's the pro.zway. It's going to configure. I have one sitting around here somewhere. I don't know where it is currently. There it is. It's in here. I'll connect to that device, and this pulls up my Z-Wee gateway. Once I've added the device, very, very easy to go in. I'm just going to go ahead and I'm actually going to remove Node. If you're familiar with the Z-Wave process, generally when you get it brand new out of the box, it's not going to be associated with anything. Of course, all my devices are associated with, well, my Office. So I want to remove them from my other processor. So I'll just select each button, press it. It's going to remove the device. It's going to remove my second one, and I'll press Close. So now those devices are, for all intents and purposes, exactly like they would come right out of the box. To add device, I'm going to hit Device, Add Include. I'll press those buttons. It's going to pull all the information down from that specific device. I can name this whatever I want. This is a dimmer. I'll just call it Dimmer 1. Once it's named, that's all I have to do. I'll just go move on to my next device. I'll press the button on the device. It will pull down all the class information about it. I can rename this one Dimmer 2, and that's all the devices. I don't have any other ones laying around here, and I'll just go ahead and click Close. Now that we have our two devices, you can select them on the left-hand side. You can also select your ZWE if you want to change the name or whatever fancy things you want to do with that. There's lots of information here when you select the individual devices. This highly depends upon the device you're working with, whether it's a battery one, whether it's a plug-in module. You can manually control it here, just turning it on and off, and you'll have to just believe me, yes, it is turning on and off on my desk. You can set some levels, some parameters that you can change, like the ramp time. If you're not into ramping, like I'm not sometimes, I'll just set that parameter. You can adjust these. These are highly dependent upon the device that you're working with. You can also set associations. So if I want dimmer 2 to be tied to dimmer 1, I'll update the associations. I'll go to my dimmer 2, do the same thing so that these two devices are now tied together. I don't know if you'll actually be able to see, yeah, you won't be able to see it on the screen. But when I press 1, they both turn on. When I press it again, they both turn off. So they're now tied together, and we just do that with the associations if you're not familiar with that. When you've added all your devices, you're all set and done, just go ahead and hit save. It's going to save the project. It'll ask you to do a device recovery, which will dump basically all the programming inside of the ZWE just in case you lose your system file. You don't have to lose all of your Z-Wave backup information. So that will just dump that right there. And then we can close the Z-Wave manager. Back in the system file, we work just like we used to do before. And the commands now add our mat office, and here's our dimmer 1, dimmer 2, here's the ramps, set level, adjust level, all the information available right here for those two devices. So I don't have to then set up my Z-Wave and then go in and, usually you have to do some node number dance and bring in information, then you have to type in what everything is. This all imports it, dumps it right into the software for our Z-Wave devices. Again, this works with not only our own Z-Wave devices, but with any certified Z-Wave device that you may be used to. I know there's some other companies like Fabaro makes some wonderful, sleek-looking devices. Those are some of my personal favorites. But those are available and they work wonderfully, and we've tested those to no end in our office to make sure that they work with our software and with our nodes, something that may not be as prevalent in the industry working with other people's Z-Wave devices. So, well, I don't want to run too deep. I'm already 5 minutes over, sorry. If you guys have any questions, I'll unmute anyone. You can just go ahead and blurt out or raise your hand or type any question you have in the question box.